So who was here last time? I remember your face.
I was there too.
Okay. You guys are new? Okay. All right. Little bit about myself. My name is Julie Vogel. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have my own private practice now. And you have my business card in there. So if you have any questions or if you want to roll an idea off of somebody, feel free to call. That's my cell phone number and my home number. That's what I use for my business, so I don't have any problems. My home phone number, which is the 823 number, I have an answering machine on it, so you got to listen to the answering machine, and then I kind of screen who I'm picking up for and who I'm not. So tell me who you are, and if I'm not busy, I'll talk to you right away. But you got to listen through the message, okay? My background, I think my specialty is post-traumatic stress and those kinds of issues. I deal with some children, not a whole lot of children, mostly adults who have never had the opportunity to live in some place like the Mustard Ranch, and now they're in their midlife and all the memories and all the traumas coming back, and I do a lot of that kind of stuff. In terms of my belief system, I do believe that there are some things that are genetic and that we just have to deal with them. However, I consider myself more a behavioralist. I think even if somebody's born with a genetic situation, if we've got the right behavior and we've got the right nurturing, we can resolve a whole lot of issues. Okay? The email that was sent to me, they said that you guys want to have more information about ADHD and PTSD and some of that kind of stuff. But I want to give you a foundation. Some of this is a repeat from the first time around, but as the educators know, overlearning is a good thing. So we'll do some of that kind of stuff. And then we'll get some specifics. I brought some information about sexual development in children. I brought, again, stages of development, but I'm going to give you some tweaks on that, on how it may be different with a child in the foster system or in the adoptive system, how stages of development change a little bit, some of the things that you could be looking for, okay? But to begin with, and again, this is a repeat from the first round. We'll do it again. Is how do we learn? How do we get information? How do we learn about the world? And pretty much what it is we have experiences that come from family, the community, church, peers, all that stuff that happens to us. And whether we realize it or not, we think something about what's happening, we feel something about that, and then we make a decision about what happened, okay? So a typical post-traumatic stress situation with children that you're dealing with, mom and dad's under the influence, they either abuse them or neglect them. Children, depending on the age of development, but let's go at a lower age of development, a smaller child is going to assume, because they're egocentric and everything revolves around them, they're going to assume that that situation is about them. So in their mind, they may think something like, well, if I got better grades at school, if I cleaned my room better, if I didn't yell, if I eat my supper, all of those kinds of things. There might be stress attached to that, and how they respond then to life depends on that biological piece of their development. So we got some kids that are going to become what we call lost children and are going to disappear. You have any of those kids that can disappear in a crowd? They're there, but they're so quiet, or they're so inconspicuous you don't even know they're in the room. Okay, that may be a response to that scenario I give you. Or, depending on that child's personality, they could be the one who's yelling, screaming, and hollering all the time. Because in their mind, I've got to get some attention to figure out how to solve this problem. Okay? But everything we do goes through that process. Now, one of the groups of kids that have difficulty, you're going to have difficulty with, are ADHD kids. Because when you ask them about that chatter in their head, what are you thinking? They can't do it. Okay? Some of the kids who are ADHD and have gone through some kind of normalcy in development, the older kids, when they do something, you can ask them, so what were you thinking and feeling when this happened? They're going to be able to do that, and you're going to be able to do some cognitive work on their thought process. But those ADHD kids can't do that. So that's right away one of those difficulties with kids that we might run into. Okay? But everything you guys know, everything the kids that are in your homes, this is the process. And we can change the process. That's the good news. Okay? You might have years and years and years of this going on. Okay? But ultimately, what we need to do is give them a new beginning and help them with this thought process. So this is how we're going to do it in our house. What do you think about that, and how do you feel about that? And you might actually have to verbalize that. Okay? Going backwards, I also want you to tell you about myself is that I believe in what I call proactive parenting, which means we don't sit around and wait for behaviors to happen and then go, gee, what should we do about it? What we do is we set up our homes, we set up every situation to the best of our ability so that we can have the best outcome. Okay? It was funny. Sometimes it takes a while for me to process information, but the last time I was here, they were talking about one of the little girls, and the kids went outside, and the roller skates went outside, and then there was an issue because she roller skated and wasn't supposed to, and who was that? That was the little Gracie. It was Gracie. Okay? And after I got home, I thought, if she wasn't supposed to use the roller skates, and nobody was supposed to roller skate, it never occurred to me is why did they take the roller skates out in the first place? They set her up. They set her up for failure. And that's what I mean when I say you got to put stuff in place. If you don't want something to happen, you don't dangle it in front of the kid's face and then hope that they're not going to choose it, because they are. That's what kids do. Okay? The other thing that I think is important, because it would be nice if we could have these sessions and you could say, I have this behavior and I give you this tool and you would go home and use it and it would work. I would make a fortune. But it doesn't work that way. So I'm going to give you a whole bunch of suggestions, and ultimately what parenting is, and those of you who have your own kids know this, it's trial and error. What works with one kid isn't going to work with another child, or what works for them on Monday might not work for them on Friday. So what I'm trying to give you is the basis to be able to look at behavior and go, okay, what is going on? Because all behavior's got to pay off. Okay? It might not appear to you it's a good payoff, but all behavior's got to pay off. And with kids in the system, and with kids that have been taken away from dysfunctional homes, attention is attention is attention is attention. And they don't care if it's positive attention or negative attention. They've just learned that if they do certain things, somebody's going to respond. You are going to get the behavior that you give the most attention to. That's just the way it is. So if you're always at this kid for the same behavior over and over and over again and you want it to stop, the first thing you got to do is figure out a way not to address that behavior so much. Because it's about attention. They're getting a payoff for that. It might be as simple as they know if they act out, you're going to ignore all those other kids and you're going to spend your time trying to fuss about their behavior. They've got your 100% attention. Because remember, some of the kids that you've had in your homes may have been left for days. Or if mom and dad were people that were users of drugs and alcohol, even if mom and dad was home, they never got any attention. And we know from research, we're the only animal on the planet without nurturing that will die. They did tons of research in Sarajevo and some of these orphanages in the globe, and yes, children were fed, and yes, they were clothed, and yes, they had cribs, and yes, they had beds, and if they had a toy, they were lucky. But those children that were not held, those children that didn't have regular attention died. Okay? So that need for attention is very, very strong. And up until the age of 7, a child lives out of their emotion. Okay? Now, you may think that they're sitting in their room planning a really good way to irritate you, but they don't have that capability. It's all out of emotion. And they don't even realize sometimes the emotion that they're dealing with. A child knows instinctively, if I don't have a parent that takes care of me, I could die. I mean, that's the body. Now, they don't think that in their head, but their body knows that. And so they will do anything for some kind of attention, because for them, it's life and death. I have adults that still have those memories. They're always afraid. They always feel unsafe. And it goes back to that childhood root of never knowing that they can count on anybody. People that I've got a couple people, 300 pounds plus, who eat and eat and eat. They're not hungry, but they have childhood memories of being left and not being fed. So if there's food there, they're going to eat it, whether they need it or not. Now, psychologically in their head, they know they're overweight. They know they're not supposed to eat any more food. But that childhood need to survive is so strong that they're continuing that process. Okay? You might have some kids with food issues. Dr. Bavlik, who does a program called the Nurturing Program, which is a parenting program. When I was in Wisconsin, it was a parenting program that I learned, and I did some training with him. But in his research, Dr. Bavlik found out that if we take all kinds of people that have had their children taken away, and we look at what they have in common, he found out that these 5 things are something that they all tend to share. And he wrote his parenting program according to this. So when we do the nurturing program, when we work with parents who've had their children taken away so they get their kids back, these are the things we teach them. Why is this important to you? Because it's going to show you how it affects the child and some of the things that you might be seeing. Because you can't assume, see, what we do sometimes is we just assume kids know stuff. And as much as I know that's not true, sometimes it amazes me. I had a 13-year-old girl in my office the other day who was very upset because she wanted to help her mother, and she didn't know how to wash dishes. And I was like, well, 13, you don't know how to wash dishes? I mean, I didn't say it that way, but I was shocked. How does a 13-year-old not learn how to wash dishes? And she went to her mother and asked her mother, if she wanted to help her mom, if she could teach her how to wash dishes, and her mom jumped down her throat. You should know that by now. Well, how's she going to know that if nobody taught her? You know, mom never realized. And this is an ongoing thing in that particular family. So just an example, we say, go clean your room. Do they know what that means? And depending on individual people, that could mean 100 different things. I can take 100 people off the street and say, so tell me, what's a clean room? If your mom said go clean your room, what would that mean? I get 100 different answers. Okay? So the first one is inappropriate expectations, and that goes back to this developmental stuff. What can a child accomplish at a certain age? Further down, we have role reversals. And that often is hooked into inappropriate expectations because you'll find in families where there's a lot of dysfunction, little bitty kids are taking care of little bitty kids. That's an inappropriate expectation. I've had adult clients in my office that say by the time they were 6, they were raising their little brother. A 6-year-old's got no business raising a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. That's an inappropriate expectation. You know, what can they do? And to know those stages of development. Now, we're going to look at stages of development in a minute. What happens with emotional development is when a child experiences a trauma, emotional development tends to stop. So you might have a 16-year-old, and you might be floored by their behavior, and in your mind you're thinking, he's 16, why is he acting like a 10-year-old? Why is he acting like an 8-year-old? Because he is. Okay? Emotionally, he never went through those stages of development. Okay? I did drug and alcohol counseling for about 5 years, and when people get clean and sober, they often say things like, I feel like I'm 13. I don't know why. It's because they are. They started drinking when they were 12 and 13, and emotional development stopped. So I might have a 60-year-old, but they're going through adolescence. Okay, so be aware of those kinds of things. Okay. When there's inappropriate expectations of a child, kids are really hard on themselves because ultimately they know they want to please that adult, and they try, and they try, and they try, but if it's not developmentally appropriate, they fail. And so at a very young age, it's imprinted on a child's head that I'm not good enough, that I can't accomplish what people ask me to do. And that's when you often get that, I'm not doing nothing because why should I? I can't do anything. And that's only because that at that point in time, the expectation for them was higher than they could have accomplished. Okay? So what might be an appropriate expectation? Let's go back to doing dishes. So 6 or 7-year-old might be able to put the pots away and feel really good about putting the pots away. Okay? That would be a good thing. Can they go clean their room with assistance? You make the bed and I'll put the toys in the... Good for you. Wow. Good stuff. You may have to kind of redo some of this stuff. Again, What you're doing by helping the child heal is to go through those stages that they probably weren't able to do before. Praise. Try as much as possible. Every time you praise a child, try not to, what a good job, you made me really happy. Try not to attach their praise to you. Okay? Say things like, wow, what a good job. Didn't that make you feel good that you did it? Because chances are, after these kids leave the mustard seed, if the family's dysfunctional, they're going out into the world and they're going to have to make family, or they're not going to have people that are going to be patting them on the back all the time. But none of us do, right? How many of us go to work and our boss goes, gosh, I'm glad you're here. You're doing such a good job. You know, I think I'll give you a raise because you're really good. No, they don't do that. We need to teach kids how to praise themselves. Okay, for everything. Doesn't it feel good to get those emotions rolling? Because the other thing that happens with kids that have been abused or neglected is they have pushed those emotions and needs down so low, most of the time they may not know what they're feeling. And oftentimes the only feeling that you ever get is when they erupt with anger. Because, you know, that's one of them that if we can't push down too much, eventually it becomes a volcano. And then we get it. Okay? Low levels of empathy. Just because you acknowledge a child's feelings doesn't mean you have to change what you're doing. Okay? Most people who are abusive don't get kids' feelings. We have statements like, and some of you may have experienced this one. You crying? I'll give you something to cry about. I know my dad, his favorite phrase was, you got food in your belly, you got a roof over your head, what do you need to complain about? You know, you're not supposed to have any feelings. So you're in the store with a child and the child wants a toy and the child is crying. It's okay to say, it really hurts when you can't get something you want. Yes, it does. I understand. But we don't have the money today. Or that's not within the rules. Or whatever. But it's about acknowledging what they're feeling. Anger is a really hard one because most people don't want to deal with it. Again, it's okay to acknowledge you're angry. Tell me why you're angry. It doesn't mean that you've got to make them stop being angry. You might have to help them figure out a better way to express it. You know, we've got those issues of respect and, you know, how do we talk to adults and all that kind of stuff. But you can't get there until you figure out where that emotion's coming from. And I will tell you that with anger, 99.9999% is sadness. Because anger is a secondary emotion. Boys more than girls, when confronted with sadness, will get angry and violent. However, we're seeing a really big increase in girls becoming just as violent and just as angry as boys. Us women have evolved. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But often, anger's got two pieces to it. It's got a physical piece and it's got an emotional piece. So, if you can help that kid who's out of control do something physical first, and then talk about the anger second, you'll get much further. Now I know sometimes you can't do that, but it really, really works. go outside and run laps around the house for 5 minutes, and then come back in, and then we'll talk about what just happened. Okay? If steam's coming out of your ears and you're red in the face, it's not about the child. It's about you. And then you need to, everybody needs to go to their corners. And you need to figure out what's going on, because it probably has touched a childhood memory of your own. Figure it out, and you can always go back and talk about it later. A lot of times people think that those big emotional events have to be handled right now, here and now, and it doesn't. It doesn't. If the emotions are that bad, and you're red in the face and steam's coming out of your ears and the kid is screaming and hollering and stamping their feet and whatever, nobody knows what's going on. Really, nobody knows what's going on. Separate yourselves. That bell curve that we learned in elementary school, that's how emotion goes. It's very interesting. And that time period normally lasts for about 20, 25 minutes. Okay? So if you go to your corners and you let that anger, and you've all experienced this, where you think later, what was I so angry about? That's that bell curve. Same thing happens with sadness in people. When they're really, really depressed and they start crying, most of my clients think that if they start crying, they're never going to stop, which is why they don't allow themselves to cry. And we can time it. If they get brave enough, you know, okay, let it flow, and I'll sit here with you. If it takes 3 hours, I'll sit here with you. And I go, okay. And they start crying. About 20 minutes later, they go down the end of that bell curve and go, oh, okay. Now it might happen again, but ultimately emotion lasts 20, 25 minutes. That intense stuff that we think's never going to end, and it does. Okay, that's just the way the brain deals with it. So, how do we teach empathy to children? Anybody got any ideas? Have you tried some things? How do you teach kids how to understand other people's feelings? What do you think?
I let them see it in me. I let them see it in me when I...
Okay, so if you're modeling good emotions and behavior, I understand even with your wife, if she gets sad and you put your arm around her, they're watching. Mm-hmm. Kids are always watching. That's good. Somebody else said something?
I was going to say role models.
Role models. You know, you guys do a lot here. Animals. Animals is that first place with kids, really tough kids, to start understanding how to feel for something else. And animals are safe because most of the kids I suspect that you deal with haven't had really bad experiences with animals. They've had bad experiences with people. But to be able to nurture and care for animals are wonderful things. If you have an opportunity, you know, I don't know how much movie watching with the older kids, you know, you can have a dialogue about a movie. What do you think that kid's feeling? What's going on that they did that? Again, obviously not all the time, because they'll never watch another movie again, because they don't like their movies disturbed. But, you know, that's a wonderful opportunity. Now, going back to those ADHD kids, that's another one of those problems with ADHD kids, is they don't read body language. They don't get it, and you've got to teach it to them. You know, those kids on the playground, they've just had a fight. You know, the kid with ADHD just clobbered somebody. And if you ask them to look at that other child, do you see that they got their fists clenched? Do you see that they're gritting their teeth? What do you think? How do they feel about you right now? They don't get it. Okay? Now again, we would think that would be a normal emotional thing, but their brains don't work that way. They don't read those things. So when we worked with Dr. Bavlik, one of the things we did with the younger kids even, I've got photographs of kids that are smiling and crying, and we teach them. This is what a sad person looks like. Look at their eyebrows. Look at the way they hold their mouth. You can teach kids, but they don't, for whatever reason, they don't pick up on body signals. So if you've got an ADHD kid in your house and you are totally frustrated because it's like, they knew I was angry. I yelled at them 5 times. No, they don't. They don't read it. On top of the fact their mind's going 80 miles a minute that they're not stopping long enough to look. Okay, you ever sit and watch TV with somebody who changes channels? That's the way a child with ADHD, that's the way their brain is working all the time. Can you imagine after a while, I get cranky when I'm in a room with somebody like that. Can you imagine if the brain was like that all the time? I would not be a very happy camper. It's really frustrating. Okay, but there are things we can do. Strong belief in corporal punishment. This is a hard one because there's mixed messages in society, particularly the Christian spare the rod and spoil the child kind of thing. So when I do parenting classes, inevitably somebody will say, but it's in the Bible. I'm supposed to beat my kid. In the translation, it's actually a staff. And the staff is that long thing that the shepherds used with the curly thing on the top. And they used to guide their sheep with it. A good shepherd's not going to hit their sheep. Because if they hit their sheep, it doesn't grow any beautiful, woolly, nice stuff. And that's part of their income. And if you hit the sheep, it's going to cause scarring. So a shepherd doesn't hit sheep. Sheep are really dumb animals. And the shepherd guides them. Okay? It's not an accident that biblically we talk about the shepherd and the sheep. Because we're dumb. People are dumb too. We make dumb choices. That sheep, if he goes off into the woods and he falls over on his back, because of his body structure, he cannot get back up and he suffocates. That's why the shepherd has to go after that lost sheep. If we have 2 pools of water and one's poisonous and one's clean, sheep will drink whatever is put in front of them. So he needs a shepherd to guide him. Okay. I don't know, do you guys, I'm assuming there's no corporal punishment. Good. There is nothing that you can't get a child to do without hitting them that you can get them to do with hitting. Did that make sense? I don't know if that came out right. But Dr. Bavlik's phrase is, there's always a parent that says, well, I turned out just fine. My dad used to take me back to the woodshed and used to beat me, and look at me, I'm fine. Dr. Bavlik says a person survives in spite of corporal punishment, not because of. They did a study in a prison. It was someplace in the South. It's a men's prison, and what they did is they interviewed all the inmates, and that statement of, if only we could hit our kids these days, the world would be better. They found out that all of those inmates lived in homes with corporal punishment. So the fact of the matter, you know, if you end up, I don't know how much contact you have with biological parents, and you have an opportunity to have discussions about corporal punishment, but there's just some really good reasons. People who are really adamant about corporal punishment, when I say to them, so if I could teach you how to get the same behavior out of your child without hitting them, would you do that instead? They will say yes. Okay, so even people with strong feelings about corporal punishment know that ultimately they don't want to hit their kids. Reverse family roles, parentified children. You may have some of those in your home, especially if you get sibling groups. And you may have siblings that don't want to give up their parenting role. Don't take it away from them too fast. Okay? They need that. That's part of who they are. Okay? You can share for a while and ease them out of that parenting role. But if you have a sibling group that comes in and they're parentified, they've always taken care of their siblings, it can be really damaging if you take that role away from them right away. Okay? But you can ease them into it. These kids tend not to have really low self-esteem if they've grown up in a household where there's been family role reversals, and they don't recognize that they have any needs. And it can get really extreme. I've got two twins that I see. If I say, what's your favorite dinner that you'd like to eat? They will sit there and look at me and say nothing. If I say, you know, my favorite's meatloaf, 5 minutes later they will say, I like meatloaf. Okay? They have no sense whatsoever of what they like. They are so used to doing what other people want them to do that they have no idea. Okay? So be aware of that. So how do we change that? If we go back to that learning profile, how do we change that? We have lots and lots and lots of trying experiences. Okay? We're going to try beets tonight. You don't have to eat them all if you don't like them, but have a couple spoonfuls and let's see how beets taste. And let's see how peanut butter tastes. And let's see, because the reality is some of your kids may not know. May really not know. When I lived and worked in the inner city of Milwaukee, I had kids in my nurturing program that had never eaten anything at home other than cereal. They were on the free lunch program at school, so they got to taste some really bad nutritious food at school, but at home, the only thing they ever ate was dry cereal. They didn't have a clue. Didn't have a clue. So again, you know, some fun things. I don't know, do you guys garden out here?
We tried to in the past.
Okay. Any hands-on kind of stuff with kids when it comes to food? This is how it grows. This is what it looks like. Let's wash it. Let's cook it. Kids are more apt, we're finding out with some of these nutrition programs around the country, kids are more apt to eat good food if they have a part in the process. It's good stuff. Restricts power. You may have some kids that are very passive. So even when you give them the opportunity, I did school teaching for a while, and I could always tell the kids that were living in kind of dysfunctional homes, because you know, teaching, they're really big into group projects these days. We're supposed to all sit around the table and build stuff. That would be that kid that would sit there and watch and wouldn't touch it. Okay. You may have some of those kids, because part of that stage of development stuff, that terrible two thing, there's a reason for it. They're supposed to touch everything, and they're supposed to taste everything, and they're supposed to get dirty, and because that's how they learn about the world. And so if they live in a household where things are very, very restrictive because mom or dad don't know what to do with that, or they just don't want to deal with it, the child loses that ability to look and discover. And so again, the kids you're dealing with, any opportunity you can have to give them those things. Okay? Because you never know. I had a 15-year-old that lived below us in Milwaukee. I don't know how many of you know about Wisconsin or whatever, but Lake Michigan is in the city of Milwaukee. It's right downtown. The inner city, maybe 30 blocks from Lake Michigan. This child who lived below me had never seen a lake. And it just blew me away. But that happens with a lot of kids who live in dysfunctional situations or in poverty situations. They never leave the 10, 15 block radius of where they grew up. And here what we see are this family and all the relatives live up in this mountain, and other than going to school, and sometimes they don't even go to school, they really don't experience other stuff. Took this kid down to Lake Michigan, and he was like a 3-year-old touching the sand and looking at the water. He had never experienced this. So again, don't necessarily assume that the kids that you're getting in your homes have had the life experiences that you have. So anything you can do to get them thinking. And again, in their mind, because grandma and mom and uncle and whatever have all lived a certain lifestyle, they don't have a clue that there's more options for them out there. When I taught in the inner city, it was so hard to convince kids that they could go to college, because nobody they knew went to college. You know, kids acted out, and they'd look at me and go, I'm not going to be alive when I'm 25. Because not, you know, other than grandma and grandpa and maybe their mom living in the inner city, all their male relatives were dead. Because they were all drug dealers. So they look at me and go, why? Why do I have to get good grades? I'm not going to be here. What's the point? Okay, so the more you can get kids to look outside of their world, the better. You know, go to a museum. Go look at art. Even if you're not into this, you know, it's good for you too. You know, go to Nashville. Go see some museums. Do some touchy-feely stuff. Go to Hobby Lobby and try some arts and crafts. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you know, that's the kind of stuff we do. We're supposed to be doing when we're growing up. And the kids that you're dealing with haven't had those opportunities. Just haven't. Okay? And don't assume it's always poverty either. I grew up in an upper middle class family. My dad was the accountant for the highway department. My mother was the editor of a local newspaper. They were both functional alcoholics. I didn't exist when I was growing up. I was in the way because they were busy and they had things to do. So as long as I kept my mouth shut, basically, and got good grades in school, everything was fine. I was miserable. Okay, so it doesn't, I think sometimes we assume that dysfunction and abuse and all of those kinds of things only happens in poor homes, only happens, and it doesn't. Okay? I don't know what your general demographic is. Do you tend to get more referrals from DCS kind of thing? Or
Now from parents and guardians.
okay. Okay. We're going to look at the stages of development again, just so you have a sense of what's going on. There are lots of different theories about development. I like Erikson because Erikson gives me hope. Erikson says that if we miss it, we can go back and fix it. And there are some people that don't believe that. I'm the eternal optimist. Some of my clients say that I drive them crazy, but I'm the eternal optimist. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. You know, I've been to hell and back. If I can do it, hey buddy, I'm the cheerleader. Okay, so just to have a sense of where kids are supposed to be at. Okay, that very early stage of development, day one, the baby's put in the crib, and the baby's crying, and somebody comes and gives them something to eat, and changes their diaper, and rubs their back. Now, the job is not to make the baby stop crying. The job is to let the baby know that we're there for them. Okay? So we rub their back. If a child has that kind of experience, from day one, they learn a couple of things. The world's a safe place. When I have needs, someone will come and meet them, and it's okay to have needs. What a phenomenal thing to learn from day one. Okay? Again, that kid who's put in, and I hate playpens, but I see him. That kid who's put in that playpen and stays in that playpen all day long, and unless, you know, they're bleeding, nobody comes and attends to them. You have essentially an individual that starts out from the beginning scared. And what I need doesn't matter, because nobody's coming. Okay? Now, that's very elementary, but really important. Because again, remember what we said earlier about that child. That child knows that if they're neglected long enough, they're going to die. So there's a lot of fear in that whole process. Terrified fear. Who's going to take care of me? Okay? From a dysfunctional standpoint, that what develops then right away are defense mechanisms. Okay? I'm going to sit here and I'm going to scream until somebody acknowledges that I'm here. Okay? That can follow. I've seen 8, 9, 10-year-olds that do that. Will stand in one place and just howl. Even when somebody is attending to them, they will continue to howl. That goes way back to that early stuff. Okay? Let me see something here. This other stuff. In terms of kids that are in the adoption process or are foster or whatever, we need to use good language, okay? A 3-year-old, whether they're living with mom or dad, or they're with, I don't know if you take kids that young, but even a child that young wants to hear their birth story. Okay, do you ever remember as a kid sitting on your mom and dad's lap and them telling you about how wonderful it was the day you were born, and it feels good, and we could hardly wait till you came, and all of those kind of stories that go on, okay? You can create those stories with your kids, okay? No matter what mom and dad have done, ultimately a child wants to know that when they came into the world, they were important. No matter how dysfunctional parents are, they still tell those stories about how wonderful it was the day their child was born. And you can tell your kids that when they ask those stories. You know, things may have changed road, and it was dysfunctional, and maybe mom doesn't know how to parent, and ultimately we're parented the way we were parented. So ultimately people who are not good parents, all that means is that they're very hurt children themselves. But you can create a birth story. You can talk about, I actually have I don't know if I have with me, I have a family tree where the roots are the birth parents, and then we have foster parents, and then the branches can be adoptive parents, or the branches, we can bring the birth parents back up, that after they've grown, you get to go home, and you know, the adoptive parents can be at the top of the family tree as well. There's just a lot of things you can do. Do you guys do books with the kids with pictures when they were younger and any of that kind of stuff? Some of that is fun if you have access to that stuff. Help them create